I brought Sunday school is about government, basically Bible government. And I thought we'd talk a little bit about our government since we got a big vote coming up. And how many of you have already voted? When? Most of you? Some of you? Okay. Yeah, we waited about an hour and a half in the rain, although when we got there a half hour before they opened, and it was already wrapped around once and running about 100 yards, I'd say, or close to that. And maybe 50 yards, I may be exaggerating. But when we got out of the car and got in line, we just were barely underneath the awning. A few more minutes and we'd have been standing out in the rain. And there were people standing out in the rain. I mean, the whole time we were there, when we left, and probably throughout the afternoon, they're standing out there because it's just, that line was so long. Keith said he had to wait, he waited 3 hours to vote. This is, I think folks realize just how important this election is. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about our government. We talked about the biblical government where basically it's a monarchy, but it's more than that. It's a theocracy. With a monarchy, the problem with a monarchy is, especially if it's what you call an absolute monarchy, where all the power resides in the throne. The problem with that is that if you get a bad king, you're going to have a lot of bad days. And if you get a good king, you know, I studied the life of King James because I just wanted to know about him, and there's a lot of lies out there about him, lies that were told about him 20 years after he was dead. And I don't tend to believe folks like that. But if you read the history of that guy, he's one of the finest kings that England ever had, no doubt about it. A statesman, knew 5 languages fluently, and he knew about 2 or 3 others to where he could at least converse. He had written all kinds he even read a track on tobacco because that's when it started coming over. What's the guy's name? Raleigh, Sir Walter Raleigh, the big smoker. They start bringing all that stuff over from the New World, and he wrote a gospel tract against smoking, against tobacco. And you can find it online, you can read it. It's kind of old English, but you can read it. He was well versed. He was a good king. I don't think there was any major wars during his reign. I think they prospered, and he certainly gave his countrymen something that, we can thank him for today, and that's the King James Bible. And the Lord chose him not only just for his name, but I think also for his character. Now, there was some clown that said that King James was a homosexual. Well, he had like 6 children. He loved his wife dearly, even when she shot his hunting dog, Jewel. And by accident, shot and killed the hunting dog, Jewel, and he was an avid hunter. He was upset, but he ended up forgiving her, and he even gave her a jewel, a piece of jewelry, to show that, that everything was fine. So there was everything. He was a sickly kind of king, though. He was sickly a lot. And some of his company was, William Shakespeare, that's who he hung with, that crowd. And when some of the men that were translators for the King James Bible came into his presence, he abstained from all levity. That means he didn't crack any jokes, didn't, hee-haw, like that. You see the King's Court with the jokers and all that stuff, I kind of think of that. He didn't have any of that going on. He had respect for those men. Anyway, so you can have a good king. Then you can have a rotten king. A king that can sell you out, a king that can make your lives horrible. When Solomon left the throne, his son Rehoboam took the throne, and it ended up splitting under him. And he said, I can't actually explain the term, not in mixed audience, but what he said was that if you think my father was heavy-handed, you wait till I get up there. And that's when 10 of the tribes said, see ya, and split the kingdom. So it does matter. And the problem, I'm not against monarchy. That's a biblical system of government. But with sin in the picture, it's not always the best. And when the Lord Jesus Christ comes back and He's the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, well, then no problem. We got a sinless king. that will judge righteous judgment all the time. Never make a wrong decision. I can deal with that. But I think we have, outside of a biblical monarchy, I think we have the most perfect system that you can have for sinful man. The problem is whether we can keep it. And this is what we call a constitutional republic. Now, two words there, constitutional and republic. It's a document. This document called the Constitution is the law behind everything that how our government rules. In other words, there's rules for the rulers. That's a good thing. And when they stick to that Constitution, listen, you and I live by a document. Here it is. And when we live within the confines of that document, we please God. And when you live within the confines of this document, the Constitution, well, you please your government. You also please society. You stay within the laws. And it gives you certain rights. So, the word republic just means a public affair. And that is, there are folks that get to vote, but when they vote, they're voting for someone who's going to adhere to this. Make sense? This is the law of the land right there. That's what a constitutional republic is. It is the law that we live by, not by one man dictating to us what we're going to do, like a king would, like a dictator would. We all have to live by this. Even our rulers are within the confines of these pages. Well, we're finding out that didn't necessarily stick like we thought it would. There's an old quote going around, and they say it's true that Franklin came out of the Constitutional Convention in 1787, and a man said, Dr. Franklin, what have we got, sir? Do we have a monarchy or do we have a republic? And he said, sir, you have a republic if you can keep it. And if he said it just like that, no truer words are ever spoken, because it is under assault, because it gives you freedom. I don't think there's any freedom listed there, search and seizure and the Army coming in and squatting on your place, or even the Second Amendment. I think the Second Amendment's there because without it, all of them are mute. But that First Amendment, I think that one chased the devil. See, I don't care that I'm glad everybody has the freedom of religion in this country. Believe whatever they want. I believe that a Mormon ought to believe what a Mormon wants to believe, and a Jehovah's Witness wants to believe, and what I believe to convince that Mormon he's wrong, to convince that JW he's wrong, or they'll convince me. That's called freedom. I'm for it. I'm for protecting their rights as well as mine. Because government, we don't want them involved with this. Stay out of it. Separation of church and state. Not the state and God, not the state and the Bible, but the state and the church. You mingle those two together, people start dying. So, our system of government, and I've been looking at this, consists of three brilliant components. And of course, the first one I just mentioned is the Constitution. It's the document that we obey, not a man. It's the rule of law. It is the words of that document that is the highest law in the land that gives us our freedom, not Congress, not the President, and not the Supreme Court. In fact, all of those folks have to take an oath that they're going to obey and defend that document. Okay? I think one of the things in the last days says traitors, people who break covenant breakers. That's what we've got. We've got a bunch of politicians that have broken their oath to the Constitution. Now you say, well, it's just how they read it. Well, I don't care how they read it. I want to know the original intent of what the founders thought. That's what gave me my freedom. Why would I care what this guy thinks, with his modernized thinking of how he wants to interpret the Constitution? That's why we have what's called the Federalist Papers. It's 85 essays by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, all signers of the Constitution. And in those 85 essays, it explains what the founders or the writers of the Constitution were thinking when they put those words down. That's why when we're looking for a Supreme Court judge, we want someone who is a constitutionalist, someone who looks at what the intent was back here, not what people want it to be now. You say, well, maybe it's just old and outdated. Well, is this old and outdated? Is freedom of religion old and outdated? Is the right to bear arms old and outdated? So we want to keep that. And they all take an oath to obey that. You say, well, I thought we were a democracy. Well, there's parts of the system are. I'm talking about the central federal government, basically. But we have state government. They even have constitutions. I don't know if you've ever read your constitution from your state. You might want to. It might be eye-opening. Well, it might be eye-opening if you just read our constitution once of the federal government. It'd be interesting to you. I mean, I didn't know what was all in there. I mean, I heard about the Declaration of Independence, but all that did was free us from King George and kind of say, look, we're going to do our thing, you do your thing. We declared our independence, but then they had to come up with a government. We just couldn't just say, we did adopt some things from England. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But also our founders were smarter than that. They realized, man, that monarchy wasn't working. So they came up with a constitutional republic. When you think of democracy, it's mob rule. It's the majority of the vote. You say, well, that's the way it should be. Well, hold on a second. Hold on just a second before you throw something out there that really discriminates against a vast amount of people. Democracy, I explained last week, and this is the best description I have ever heard. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what they're going to have for dinner. If you happen to be the minority, you're done for. The majority will always win. And that's the same with the states, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The word democracy is two words, demos and kratos, people and power. People power, power of the people, power of the people. That's what we got running down the street. We got a mob running around seizing power. Did they not? That's a democracy. Got to be careful. Be up against a mob if you're not aware of what they're trying to do, and they are trying to take down the powers that be. So we have this Constitution that men put together, and it is the law of the land. And everyone that is in government swears allegiance, whether they're a police officer, whether in the military, in every branch, whether a senator or a Republican or a cabinet member or the President of the United States, they put their hand on a Bible and they swear allegiance to this document. And it's up to us, the people, to hold them to it, to make sure they don't deviate. You start losing your rights, you'll find out what the government can be. And you're just kidding yourself if you think nothing can't change. They're changing it already. We are on the verge of going from a constitutional republic to a socialist society. It's moving in that direction. And I think, you know what it is? I think it's just a bunch of folks that think they're going to get a bunch of freebies. What can I get? Who could pay for me and take care of me? Nobody. Take care of yourself. Do what you can for yourself. And you know what? People are kind enough and loving enough and charitable enough to help those that need help. But we shouldn't have to help able-bodied men and women. Get a job. Work. Make a living. Get a job. And the next thing is the great, I think brilliant, was the separation of powers. They had enough sense to know. If there's one thing that our founders understood, they understood human nature pretty well. They understood, man, if you concentrate all that power into one man or even one branch, look out. They'll end up wielding that power however they see fit. And so they separated the powers. Now, I know what you're thinking. You say, yeah, but man, most time it's just gridlock. But that's a good thing. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Now, I understand sometimes it's not so good when you gridlock somebody that's wanting to do right for the country. Just think about this, though. If the President of the United States had the Senate and the House, and he had a majority in the Supreme Court, either he would move things very rapidly in a good direction or very rapidly in a bad direction. And based on who it is and what his vision for the country is, look out. So a lot of times what you'll see is, and you'll see these checks and balances, you'll see a president get elected, but they won't give him both houses. Or if they do, they'll only give it to him for maybe a year or so, and then we have another vote. You see what they're doing? They're putting him in check. Separation of powers. Not giving him too much. Not letting him just run with the ball, you know what I mean? And a lot of times I've seen 4-year presidencies where nothing got done, and I was just as happy that nothing got done than when something gets done. It all depends who's in there. So our founding fathers understood that. They understood that we needed those separation of powers. See, what are they? Well, there's the executive branch. And that is the president and his cabinet. I don't know who all's in the executive branch, but it's basically, you see, what's that do? Well, they execute the law. They execute, they make the things happen. That's the executive branch. The executive branch may not act outside of the power given to them by the Constitution, though. All these are in check by this, or should be, and if they're not, something's wrong. That's your executive branch. Then there's the legislative branch. That's Congress. That's the House of Representatives and the Senate. They're there to make laws and policy within the confines of this. Now, if they make laws that are not within the confines of this, then there's another group we got called the judiciary. And they're there to make sure that nothing gets put into law that is against that. You see how that thing's supposed to work? You see how it's working, though, don't you? The reason why abortion became legal is there were judges put in there who weren't protecting this. They had their own political ideas of what they wanted. That's the reason it got in there. Now that we're turning it the other way, they're going crazy. I mean, literally going nuts on the other side. Because now it might go the other way. That it might actually start obeying the Constitution. I mean, everybody should have certain rights, even the unborn, as far as I'm concerned. The judicial branch are judges and justices that are to interpret the laws according to the Constitution. Any law that is passed that is deemed unconstitutional is discarded, or it should be. We call these folks originalist, constructionist, constitutionalist, maintaining the original intent at the time of its creation. That's what they're there to defend. And when you get somebody who says, well, I think we can modernize that thing, I think we can edit it, I think we can find better words for it, I think we could have a better interpretation of it or a better rendering. You get my drift? You wind up with the messenger. That sorry thing I read that doesn't read like a Bible at all. They're trying to dismantle the Constitution. Listen, without it, you say how important your Second Amendment rights. Oh, if they ever get your guns, they'll do whatever they want to you. Every dictator, every fascist, no matter who it was, that ever took over a government, disarmed its people. You know why? They don't want you to fight back. And I don't even hold that position. I figure whatever God gives us, He gives us, but I'm keeping my guns. Okay? Because I'm going to defend my family. Keep your sword. Even when Peter lopped off Malchus's ear, he said, put up thy sword. He didn't say, drop that thing! We don't believe in that! He said, put up thy sword. Put it in a sheath. Go on the internet and look up. It doesn't matter which one you look up, but there's videos on there that talk about all the genocides. I mean, just about every genocide you can imagine. And you know what you find out? The people were disarmed, and then they killed them. And I mean millions of people, millions of people. It's kind of hard to kill somebody when the entire public... You know, also, it's also good for invading armies if everybody's armed. What is it Switzerland? Switzerland, you know, it's mandatory. Every man, probably every woman now, every man has to have a gun. I saw a little documentary of a fella, and he showed me all the different guns. He was older than Cole, man. I'm serious. I mean, I think he had a musket down there, but then it goes all the way up to where he's got this machine gun. I mean, beautiful weapon. And they just kept giving them to him. I guess they figured, don't bother turning it old when we can't do nothing with it. And he just had these like 3 or 4 different guns, man, over the years. And he had to be trained, and he had to know how to use it. Why? An invading army, they can't win when everybody's shooting at them. That's another reason to stay armed. But our forefathers, or our founding fathers, realized that that any government can go wrong and it can go awry. And their intent was not for hunting, not for plinking in the backyard, but for taking down a tyrannical government. That's the reason the Second Amendment exists. Whether you like it, whether the politicians, they don't like it, of course. Why? Our sights are on them. I'm not even sure biblically we can do that. But Thomas Jefferson believed it. You read what he wrote, man, if you say what he said in the crowd today, you'll be arrested. Because he more or less said, you know, hey, because sometimes you got to refresh the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants and patriots. He says every so often there just needs to be a good killing. You know what these people, you know what these Democrats, these liberals are afraid of? You with a gun. That's what they're afraid of. I don't know, man. I don't know if we got the right to do that. In fact, I don't believe we do. I got the right to defend my home, though. I really, you know, the whole thing can go to blazes. Amen. If that means the Lord's coming back sooner, I'm all for it. Now, I would, if it's going to go down, I'd rather go down with my freedoms intact and then it just kind of fall apart than to just kind of gradually go into socialism, you know, and that kind of thing. But you know what? No matter what they go into, I still have the same Bible, the same God, the same promises, the same directives, the same instructions to continue on. And that's true for Christians in China. That's true for Christians in Russia. That's true for Christians in Muslim countries. This thing doesn't matter what the political climate is. It's just that we should be working a lot more effectively in this culture, in this climate, than in some other political climate. I mean, maybe if this gets taken away from us, maybe it's because we no longer deserve it. We certainly need to take advantage of it to do the work of God. Because they're not always on your side, as we saw in the book of Acts when they're beating the apostles. So, that long thing about the separation of powers, that's a good thing. And then there's one more thing. And I'll be honest with you, I've never really understood it fully. I understand it a lot better right now. And if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I might have told you, hey, I think we should have the popular vote. I don't believe that for a minute now. The Electoral College, I mean, this is brilliant. It's the method by which the states elect the President of the United States of America. And it's a brilliant and fair system put in place by the founders to ensure that the chief executive officer, the President of the United States, is fairly elected by all. And here's how this thing falls out. Each state has a number of delegates who cast their vote according to the will of the people of their state. Remember I said part of this is a democracy? That is, each individual state, based upon popular vote, makes the mind up of that delegate. In fact, he is sworn to follow the will of the people when it comes to that, and he votes accordingly. In other words, if Ohio has 18 delegates, and I'll tell you how they got the number of delegates, but they have 18 delegates. If the majority of Ohio votes for Joe Biden, those 18 delegates have sworn that they will follow the will of the people and they will vote. 18 votes for Joe Biden. That's just the way it is. So there is a populist vote there, but it's for the individual states, and it's there for a reason. The number of delegates consists of a number of representatives in a state along with the 2 senators each state has. Oh. So the reason why we have 18 is because we have 16 representatives and 2 senators. So, for example, I've got an example here. California has 55 delegates. And so 53 of those are House of Representatives, and 2 of them are senators. You say, well, how'd they get 55? Well, it's based upon population. Now, here's what they did. They froze the number of representatives at 435. We said, well, but we're growing as a nation. Well, here's what they do. They take the total population, what we call the aggregate, the total population divided by 235. Then they see how many blocks of population are in each state, and that determines your representation. So you could lose one or you could gain one, but you'll always stay at 235. Do you see how it works? So if everybody's losing California and they're all going to Texas, which is what's happening, Texas could wind up with another representative because they've taken a block of the population. Now, if you're counting the illegals, or you're counting people that shouldn't even be there that aren't citizens, that can sway things too. That's the reason why they shouldn't be counted. In no way should they be counted. This is about the citizens of this country. I don't decide things for Mexico, and I don't want Mexico deciding things for me. If they want to be citizens, the pathway is there. Do it legally. Man, if you went home today and caught somebody in your house sitting on your couch eating your food from the refrigerator, how would you feel? How would you feel if a squatter just moved in and you call the cops and say, the cop says, can't do it. What? He's already here. He has certain rights. He has a right to your refrigerator, a right to your couch. And you're now responsible to school him and teach him English. I mean, that's about how it is. That's crazy. Now, if you think it's okay for folks to do wrong, to do right, it's not. They can do it the right way, they can do it the wrong way. The ones who do it the wrong way, get them out. That's the way it works. Now, here's the thing about the Electoral College. No candidate can win the presidency without winning a majority of the states, including those in the Midwest, those in the center. And here's the reason why it's genius, because the population, the most populous places in the country are on both sides of the country. East Coast, West Coast, that's where the populace is. Well, obviously, if it was a popular vote, they would always get their candidate. And all of us in the middle, and maybe not Ohio so much, but like Wyoming and North and South Dakota, well, they just have to take what they get, right? They really wouldn't be represented. But the way that thing's set up, and it's, let's see here. I wrote it down somewhere. Evidently, I'm going to get to it. Yep, I'll get to it. But they need the majority of the delegates to win. 270 is the number that they need, and I'll show you why that number is important and why it comes up to that number. But they need 270 to win. Well, even if you get all the populations on all the states on the east side and the west side of the country, still not enough. You know what that makes them do? It makes them form what we call coalitions. That is, they have to look at the interest of the people in the middle as well as the people on both ends. And they have to start pleasing groups of people. They try to bring, you notice in these Trump rallies, 25,000 people. Do you think they all agree on everything? 58,000? Do you think they agree on everything? You think they're the same religion? But it's a coalition. They've come together for one purpose, to elect that man to the presidency. What he's doing, he's going to these states, and what he's doing, he's ginning up the numbers. He's getting the numbers so that he wins the popular vote in that state, which tells those delegates to vote for him. That's how the thing works. But he needs everybody. You notice they're going everywhere. I mean, Pennsylvania is supposed to be the turnkey to this thing. Pennsylvania's not on the East Coast or the West Coast. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, isn't it? Ohio's always been one. Florida. Different ones there, but they're having to go, even though they may not have that many electoral votes, they still have to go after them. There's different pathways to getting that 270. And it's kind of interesting to watch it and see how it's unfolding and who and what they're going for. But they're all making a mad dash for Pennsylvania, man, and Wisconsin. That's where it's going to make the matter, because they've already divvied up the rest of it. They pretty much know how it's going. It's now who can get those other combinations of numbers that puts them at 270 or over. A popular vote, because they live on the majority of our population lives on the East and West Coast. We only have policies that are suited for them. And by the way, we're talking about big cities. The first builder of a city was a murderer in the Bible. Cain built the first city. It said in Genesis 4, verse 16 and 17, Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And that's not the same Enoch that walked with God. And he builded a city and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. He's not too thrilled with cities, especially the ones that we have here now. There'll be some cities come along when he gets here, be okay. But the ones here now, he's not too happy with them. He said in Isaiah 14:21, prepare slaughter for his children for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise nor possess the land nor fill the face of the world with cities. You got crime, you got murder, you got people can't get along with one another. All this happens in the city. Isaiah 5:8 says, woe unto them that join house to house, that lay field to field, that till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. Everybody ought to live on a farm, man. I mean, there's so much work to do on a farm, you don't have time to get in trouble. I mean, you just don't have time. You just got to work all day long. In the city, man, you can get in all kinds of trouble. So cities aren't always the best place, but what I'm trying to tell you is where all these populations are, they got different problems than what people do that are in Iowa or in the cornfields of Iowa. So their issues are going to be different. And if you have no representation for Iowa, I guess they're just out of luck. So that's why we have the Electoral College. And listen, if they went by population, the conservative Republican would never win the presidency again. It never happened. Because those people in cities tend to be liberals. They tend to like hand-me-downs. They tend to lean on government to do everything for them. People out in the country, they don't want any sign of the government. They don't even want them around. And by the way, it doesn't work. This thing called, they're really pushing to get rid of the Electoral College. Oh, but if they do, you talk about slamming the minority. By the way, Abraham Lincoln did not win the popular vote. There were 3 parties that were running that particular year of the presidency. He only got 39.9% of the vote. I mean, it was because of the Electoral College that Lincoln was elected, not the popular vote. And where would the Emancipation Proclamation be then for the minorities? Might never have happened. They want to think twice before they get rid of the Electoral College. You cannot use the word minorities and popular vote in the same sentence. It is an oxymoron. It is a contradiction of terms. 60% of the country is white. 13% is black. 19% is Hispanic and Latino. And then Asian 6%. And the others, whatever it is, Samoans or whatever, 2% for the rest of it. Okay? Well, looks like Whitey would get his way in everything if the popular vote were put back into play, right? since we outnumber everybody. But because of the Electoral College and because these minorities are spread out and in certain areas, they constitute whether they'll win that state or not. So this president has to not only consider the interest of the majority of the people, okay, but he also has to consider the minorities of the people. What the liberals are trying to get us to think is by popular vote, we're really looking out for the minority. That's not true. You know what's always amazed me? Dr. Ruckman said this, it was like a sledgehammer of truth. He said the men that put this together were old white men. All of them. There were no women. There were no blacks. As far as I know, there were a couple whoremongers, but I don't even think there was a queer. And there maybe been one or two Catholics, but basically they were just Protestant men. Old white men that form this nation that protects all those minorities. I don't mind them being under the umbrella, but don't kick me out from under it, okay? It's just as much my country as it is yours. And I have rights too. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to eliminate your rights by establishing these rights of all of these minorities. No. We're all under the same umbrella. Don't make special laws for any minorities. We have laws. If you don't like the law, make another one. If you don't like the penalty, make it stiffer. Bashing a gay is still bashing. Bashing's against the law, whether you do it to a straight or a gay or whatever pervert it is. It's against the law. If the penalty's not stiff enough, make it stiffer. Cut off their arm if you want to. But don't make a separate law saying if you do it to this particular color or this particular whatever variation, then you're going to go to prison for twice as long. No. That's not this. That's not this. You see what they're doing, right? Okay. The delegates, and I got to finish up here. There are a total of 538 electoral delegates in play, 435 representatives, 100 senators, and 3 delegates from D.C. The District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., they have 3 delegates. And the only time they come into play is in a presidential election. That's when they can obviously you know which way they're going to go. That's why they try to make D.C. a state, Puerto Rico a state, and establish a little bit of an edge in these next elections. And by the way, Dr. Ruckman has said probably since 1950 that there's going to be 52 states. And now it looks like that could come to pass. If the Democrats get the House and the Senate, they're going to push for those two, the D.C. and Puerto Rico, to become states. It has to do with something over there in the book of Daniel. He said that 52 is divisible by 13, and we're definitely a nation of 13s. Just look on the back of your dollar bill. Anyway, so 435 reps, 100 senators, 3 delegates from D.C. 270 are needed to win. You say, what is that? That's half plus 1. That's what it is. This means the candidate must appeal to states that are in the Midwest, Mideast, or South, or not just the coastal states on either end of the country. Coalitions must be formed over a multitude of interests, the majority of the states to win. Everyone's interest must be taken into account to win. It's a pretty good system. We really don't need to mess with it. And sometimes, listen, I haven't always got the president I wanted. In fact, I can remember many times I didn't get the president I wanted. I mean, I didn't even care for people like Bush. Now, I didn't vote for the other guy. I'm just, I can't go that far left. But I mean, there are some candidates in there that were anti-Semitic. Man, I didn't know what I'd do. But I was praying they never came up for the vote. So it can get kind of tricky about, if you got nobody worth running. The reason Obama, the reason he won against McCain, the reason he won against McCain is because they were two sides of the same coin. He's what's known as a progressive, what we call a rhino. He's Republican in name only. And his liberal ideas, they thought, well, there's not much difference between this guy and Obama. Might as well just keep Obama. So you got Obama for 8 years. You got Clinton for 8 years. You think I was happy about that? But that's our system. You know what I'm happy about? I'm happy when I see somebody like that and all of a sudden the House flips and the Senate flips, or one of those flips, and they put them in check for 4 years. See, that system can work until you start messing with it. You know why they want to change those Supreme Court justices? They want to pack the courts. In other words, just increase the number to where they're completely ineffective because they don't want anybody checking them. They don't want anybody looking back on laws that probably should have never passed and be reconsidered by the courts. See, this is a self-correcting system. It's not perfect, folks, but it's the best I've ever seen. And it's supposed to be self-correcting. Ohio's 18 delegates, California's 55, Texas has 38, Florida has 29, Vermont has 3 delegates. Well, so, oh yeah, they're so small. Wyoming has 3 delegates. North Dakota has 3 delegates. That means they have 1 representative and 2 senators. Everybody gets 2 senators. South Dakota has 3 delegates. You know what that tells me? That's where I'm moving. South Dakota, North Dakota, Wyoming. I mean, I'm looking for those low population areas where you can just get kind of lost. You know what I mean? No, I'm not going anywhere. But I'll tell you what, if I didn't have the ministry and the ministry of reconciliation, I'd be very tempted. Very tempted to just go out there in a town of 100 people. Be great. Massachusetts, which is not very big, has 11 delegates. Why? A lot of population there. New Jersey has 14. A lot of population. All right. Finally, do your civic duty and vote and leave the results up to God, because it is up to God. I'll tell you how I know this. Up until January, Trump was going to win this election hands down. How many of you believe that? With an economy that, hands down, he was going to win this election till COVID came along. Now it's up to God and prayer of the saints how that thing's going to turn out. God can change this. He can do whatever he wants with it. But he has given you something. He's given you a privilege. Let me read you Romans 13, 5-7 says, "Wherefore, ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also," there's taxes, "for they are God's ministers." You understand that? Good, bad, or indifferent. Good, bad, or the ugly. They're God's ministers. And he usually gives you who you deserve. "Attending continually upon this very thing." He talks about capital punishment there. "They bear not the sword in vain." That's why, as Christians, we believe in capital punishment. We believe in it. We believe in mercy too, but we believe in capital punishment. Because it says they bear not the sword in vain. They'll cut your head off. They'll execute you. He says, "Render therefore to all their dues." You know, like duty? Dues. "Tribute to whom tribute." That's taxes. "Custom to whom custom." "Fear to whom fear." "Honor to whom honor." And he's talking about the people that run our country. He's talking about the president, whether it be Barack Obama or Trump or Clinton or whoever it may be. In other words, you're to respect that office because God set up this system of authority on this earth, whether it be monarchs, whether it be presidents, whether it be prime ministers. God set that thing up. And he wants you to respect authority. Why? If you don't respect that authority, you don't respect his authority. Now, the thing is that if you're honoring their offices, paying their taxes, and obeying their laws, why would you not vote when you're given such a privilege by God to do so? See, it doesn't make any sense. If you've got the privilege to go and vote and decide, and who knows what the Lord do? If you pray about it enough, who's to say what God will do? Now, he can do what he wants, right? And based upon certain circumstances, he can turn this thing on a dime. Listen, there's still a lot of time, and it doesn't take God much time. We all found that out when COVID came along and changed the face of this country in a matter of weeks, or a matter of a few days, actually. That was surprising. So, but what the Electoral College does is it protects against the tyranny of the majority. And you can have that, man. It encourages coalition building and unity of party. And it discourages voter fraud. It's extremely difficult to do. Now, they're going to try it, but it's going to be difficult for them to accomplish it. So that's basically how our government lays out, and the one that God has allowed us to have. Do you know how young our government is compared to other governments? We're just an experiment. We're an experiment in personal liberty. And like Franklin said, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. And we're going to decide in a few days whether we're going to keep it or not. So I encourage you to go out and vote and then leave it up to God. Like I said, either way, we still have the same directives, the same book, the same instructions, the same promises, and we're going to do the same thing whether the government's against us or for us. Doesn't make a difference. But you know what? I'd rather do it like this. You know, remember that verse I read to you? In fact, I'll read it to you again. We'll close with that. If I can find it here. 1 Timothy 2, 1-3. I exhort therefore that first of all supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority. In other words, be praying about it. That we may lead a quiet and peaceful life in all godliness and honesty, for this is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior. Living in peace and godliness, and there's nothing wrong with that. If we can have that, let's have it. But if it all goes to blazes come Tuesday, bring on the whirlwind, I guess. Because our instructions haven't changed. All right. Any questions about what I covered? Yep.
When I was going to school, we were taught the Constitution and government. Is that being taught in the schools today?
When I was in high school, back in 76, 77, 78, I had the most boring man on the planet teaching that course. I learned absolutely nothing.
I had a real good teacher.
He could have made a Bolshevik out of me. I wouldn't have known the difference.
Then I have another question.
Okay.
How many of our people in government know the Constitution? Are they studying it?
I think that ought to be a prerequisite.
I do too. I think when you get into government, you have that a course in the Constitution.
I'm for that, sis. Absolutely. Before they're ever sworn in, they better be at least tell you what I told you. Something. But they don't, they act like they don't even know it exists. Or they don't care that it exists.
They don't care. All they do is want to change things.
This is the highest law in the land. Yeah, you know the thing, man.